Mm. Welcome to today's SPO Table Talk, our fourth. Since the Plowman hard fork in January 2025, Cardano governance has entered a new phase. With the on-chain governance framework alive, Cardano governance is thriving. Yes, there has been few governance actions that required SPO participation. And yes, it is a fact that, SPO participation in governance overall has so far been lower than expected. But of course, the past few days we've seen a let's say a huge increase in that. So SPOs, thumbs up for all of the great work that you're doing in your participation. And that's important because SPOs play a critical role in approving governance actions that directly impact network security, protocol upgrades, or parameter updates as well. Today's discussion focuses on a concrete example. The Intersect Technical Steering Committee has endorsed a series of parameter updates aimed at improving the total memory available to scripts within a transaction and a block. So we'll be unpacking all of this, what it means, why is it necessary, and also diving into potential trade-offs in terms of, yeah, node performance, block, block propagation. And of course, to dive all into this, we are joined by exceptional experts, community members, actually members who does not really need an introduction. We have with us here Dominic Wallace, Senior Software Engineer, Cardano Foundation. Marcus Gufler, Technical Community Lead, Cardano Foundation. We have Pi Lanningham, Chief Technology Officer, Sunday Swap Labs. And Micah Kendall, founder of Butane Protocol. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time out and, yeah, really educating the SPO community, the Cardano community about this critical update. So I'll start from left, go to right. And if you just can briefly explain your role within the community and, yeah, also within this proposal in particular. Dominic.
Hello, I'm a dApp developer. That's how I would identify myself. And my contribution to this is fairly neutral on the proposal. I have stronger feelings, thoughts on many things, and this is not really one of them. So that's going to be my main contribution.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Pi Lanningham. I am, like you mentioned, the CTO of Sunday Labs. I've built multiple protocols on Cardano, Sunday Swap, the treasury contracts. We do a bunch of auditing across the ecosystem, a bunch of consulting. I was the one who originally proposed this protocol parameter update. This came about back when I was working on the Sunday V3 smart contracts and kind of trying to optimize and squeak out the maximum scalability out of those. And it became obvious that basically in every smart contract I looked at, ours and others, the bottleneck was almost always memory units rather than CPU. And so then, I started asking, like, does that mean that we've kind of mispriced or miscapped this resource? Did a bunch of analysis originally with Smog Pool, posted a bunch of kind of fancy charts about historical data, about where things were capping out and things like that. And then kind of made the proposal and forgot about it and let other people dig into, the empirical analysis, the benchmarking and all of that. It's taken quite a road to get there. I think it got sidetracked by getting governance live in the first place and things like that. But excited to see it finally kind of come to fruition and come to a vote.
Thank you. Marcus.
Yeah, Marcus here from the Cardano Foundation. I can remember this was quite a long time ago when when I note that Pi is looking into it or asking for such a potential improving the bottleneck. As I do a lot of things on the monitoring side, I captured some data and provided it to him. And as he mentioned, he charted this with Smoke and others. And yeah, it was like more than 2 years ago already when we saw some first charts. And I remember also some areas in these charts where it was clearly visible that there would be some more room to put something or to do something. But yeah, then it took long and governance had to boot up. I touched this proposal then again and again as a technical steering committee member and in the parameter committee. Not sure why it took so long, but we will be now really on the final meters to the over the arrival line. But we will need now the final support from DREPs and especially SPOs to finally can say done a parameter change, not only treasury withdrawals and info actions, but finally a parameter change.
This is our first parameter change, right?
There was an attempt to lower the tax. History-wise, I can already, so if we can already jump in, but
I short-circuited Micah, but yeah.
Yeah, let's finish first the intro.
Hey, Micah.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Micah. I do a very similar thing to Dominic and Pi. I build on the app layer, so everything I do is like on top of Cardano. I'm a little bit of an expert when it comes to smart contracts and Plutus and all of these things. So this parameter change directly changes and affects everything I do. So yeah.
Thank you, Micah. Thank you, gentlemen. I say let's dive right in. So what's the story, really? Who would like to start? I know, Marcus, you wanted to dive right in. So please.
Let's give it a time frame, or not a time frame, but what the SPOs had to vote on, or what this parameter change is likely something new now. Before we jump really in the meaning, so the parameters and let's say the application, the smart contract layer. Before, this is a parameter change governance action. And as some people may already know, there are 7 different types of governance actions. And by far most we have seen and people had to vote on treasury withdrawals and info actions. So SPOs are not, DREPs have and can and should vote on all the governance actions. There are a few proposals where SPOs can vote, like an info action, but it is not really relevant. They only can. And then there are a few, very few special governance actions where DREPs, where SPOs must vote with a minimum participation threshold. And this is like a hard fork initiation is one of them, but also a parameter change. And in the whole Cardano governance history, we only had a very few such cases where SPOs must vote. Most of them, like 3, were a year ago. Then there was another one in 11 months ago, which was a parameter change proposal, which failed. It was not accepted. And then we had a constitutional committee election half a year ago. That was it. So the SPOs are not really, let's say, trained or used to vote. I personally am also interested in that general governance participation situation. So what situation SPOs have? Is it like this topic where they are not so interested in so far, or if they need to understand how to vote at all? So this more on the general topic. Now I'm very happy to hand over to Pi or someone who want to say something about the proposed increase of the memory units.
Yeah. Sorry, I was responding to a message, so I missed the tail end of that. But you know, from my perspective, right now there are many different angles at which we can talk about scaling Cardano. Right? Everybody always focuses on more TPS. Right? How do we do more transactions per second? But another, like, equally important, if not more important, angle in my mind is how do we make those transactions more meaningful? How do we make sure that each of those transactions can do more complex things or get more kind of economic work done? So, for example, in the case of SundaySwap right now, we can fit 35 or so transaction or orders, right? Process 35 orders each time we submit a big batch transaction. And with the protocol, with this bump, I think that goes to 40. And then I think they're planning on breaking up the full protocol parameter bump into multiple steps. And at the end of that, we'll get up to like 45 or 50. So kind of really increasing the throughput almost, I think that's like at least 25% again of the SundaySwap protocol. And every protocols that, you know, batch is ordered is going to benefit from that. And then things like, you know, I know Phil is out there working on Midgard. The fraud proofs and the kind of settlement for the Midgard transactions require a lot of like heavy lifting execution units. And you can kind of half work around that by breaking that up into multiple transactions where you kind of like commit your intermediate work on each step. But that makes the contracts way more complicated, way more kind of brittle and prone to errors. And if you could just all fit it in fewer transactions, there's less chance for things to go wrong. So it helps with the security and the scalability and the complexity of what we can do on chain. So I think there's huge benefit to this. And in particular, hopefully now that we've got the ball rolling, the next protocol parameter change that we want to make as we kind of evaluate the impact on the chain won't take as long, because we've kind of laid that groundwork and we're exercising those muscles with people. So that's the lens I'm looking at it all through.
Yeah, gentlemen, what I'd love to know, right? And I'm looking really at just a few concerns. How these increase translates really into, like, let's say, improvements for dApp developers, for example. Is that clear already?
I can say things. Really just specific on your context. I think Pi described context where it does make a difference. I think from my experience, you can get 25% more of something. It's a far cry from like the days when you couldn't build a transaction because they just didn't fit. And there are diminishing returns on increasing them. So like, if there are surely some like small cache of use cases where the transaction doesn't fit in the current use cases, even with like the most aggressive optimizations, without causing yourself other problems. But it's going to be relatively slim. If you exceed that, then you have to break it up. You have to use more advanced techniques anyway. So I think there have been more, in fact, impactful changes for making dApps easier. I think the most obvious one is like reference scripts. That was the game changer. So this is like, yeah, better in some use cases. I guess the question to ask is like, what is the trade-off here? We don't get anything for free. The cost is going to be somewhere, and the cost is probably going to be in the impact on the chain. So do I want my transactions to be bigger, but then I've got less reliability? Is that the question that we're asking?
When you say less reliability, what do you mean by that?
So if blocks take longer to propagate, then there's a higher chance that I don't see something appearing in my chain indexer, for example. I think in reality, and someone please correct me, they chose incredibly conservative units, because it would be way worse if they were doing the other thing of changing parameters to go down, because people would have written protocols depending on these things, and then there were some issues with the network, and so they had to lower things, and then someone would have produced a protocol which didn't fit on chain. That would be bad. So they were very conservative about the numbers that they chose. That's my understanding. And they are very conservative about changing them. That's why there's an elaborate process. And the changes they're going to make are going to be very conservative. I think it was like 25% or like 11% to one parameter and 17% on another parameter, like relatively small. We're not doubling anything. Yeah, so I think, yeah, probably a bit, but I mean, it's quite hard to find the transaction that, or like the last block where 25% would have made a difference. I think Pi's example of specific transactions is easier to find than the last block where 25% X more would have allowed more throughput.
I think that is just an artifact of how activity on Cardano is down right now. I think if you go back to times where Cardano was under more load, like the meme coin summer or things like that, it's pretty easy. I mean, I think even during the launch of the Night token, the Sunday swap came very close to hitting those limits, and so you know, you can imagine there's two parameters that are getting adjusted here, right? There's the one which is the per transaction limit, and then there's another which is the per block limit. And the one that I'm actually more excited about is the per block limit in this case. The per transaction limit lets you do more within a given transaction, but at Cardano's volumes, we're not maxing out, for example, DEX batched transactions. But what we are seeing is that the overhead in a single one of those means you can fit just a few large transactions within one block. And so by increasing the block limit, you know, you increase the parallelism across either within one protocol or across multiple protocols. So for using Sunday swap as an example again, now, you know, we can fit not just you know, a few more orders per transaction, we can actually fit a few more pools per block. And so that's the kind of traffic pattern that we're seeing today, where you know, you may have one transaction that's executing against any given pool at any given time because volume is low, but you might have many different pools that need to execute, and they get kind of scheduled into the next block because they hit those limits. But that's also true across protocols, right? If there's a new token launch like the Night token and the DEX transactions are filling up blocks, then the lending protocol transactions get scheduled to the next block. And it's not like no one dApp has an advantage over another in terms of that scheduling, but it does kind of just help those things settle in parallel faster. And so yeah, it's not going to be transformative. I agree reference scripts was much bigger, but I do think it is a really big help, and in particular would have been a much bigger help or will be a bigger help when we start hopefully to see more volume, more on-chain volume come back.
Can I just say, you also have to consider it from this perspective of every time we're in the worst case scenario, so the blocks are really full, that's when this matters. It's not your average case that you're considering. It's on like huge liquidity events like, you know, October 10th last year, when everyone's getting liquidated. You want tons of smart contracts to go through because they're all holding collateralized positions for, you know, Cardano's dApp layer to have higher guarantees of like solvency. It needs to execute as fast as possible. And the effect of like the script execution units, it's a bias away from script transactions towards regular user transactions. And I think that's maybe a bit too strong if we are ever having issues where, as Pi said, you might have a batch in one block where a DEX executes, and then for that entire block, you aren't seeing any other protocol really be able to batch. Like that's, you know, fairly huge.
Marcus, do you want to speak a little bit to what the I assume you've done a lot of the measurement of like what's the practical impact for SPOs going to be? Because, you know, as Waljay was saying, you know, nothing's free. There is going to be cost somewhere. I think from what I understand, you have found that cost to be pretty small. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So let's say what I did is mostly looking into the situation on chain. So not really the theoretical simulation or the profound engineering thing. That was then a second step. I can also say something on that, as it was reviewed and requested by the parameter committee. But on the pure monitoring side, so just what is happening on mainnet and how it looks like, there were clear signs or clear evidence that there is some room for this, especially for the memory. So in similar to memory execution limits, we also have parameters and limits for the CPU execution units. And what we saw is that there is less room, but especially it would also have more impact on the time budget that every node or the network has on first minting the block, then propagating it, and then all the nodes who are evaluating it, they need to execute these more complex transactions. But the more memory the capability to use more memory on today's computers did not really have that much of an impact. I can then also post or ask or backstage directors to post a link to the review that came from the performance team from IOG. So that is something that was published like 2 weeks or 10 days ago. We have it now, and it can also be reviewed if someone who wants to cast a vote wants some real proof on the effects. So it is short bottom line thing, not really that much, and like literally nothing, literally zero impact on block propagation times. What we ask here to change.
Yeah, I can imagine, that there are, and this is a good point there, Marcus. Also, Pi, because there are stateful operators who may be concerned, that this will, let's say, reduce their block propagation time, for example, and that they might be missing a block or whatever, right? But if I'm understanding you correct, that is not the case. There is like really minimum effect to this.
Yeah, if we think about what this parameter means, right? This parameter controls when you run a smart contract, what is the maximum number of kind of cells in memory that it can allocate? And it could have had it, like there is a hypothetical world where it could have had an impact. That's why we're being cautious. Because if you allow the smart contracts to allocate more, that means they're doing more work, right? And you let them hit that CPU limit, and that means that each block takes slightly longer to process, which means it takes slightly longer to adopt. In principle, as long as we've set the CPU limit correctly, then that shouldn't be an issue, because, as you increase more of what people can do, then you hit that CPU limit that's going to impact the block propagation time before it becomes an issue. So I think that's why people were being cautious. And I think what Marcus is saying is that, in the empirical measurements and benchmarking that were done, we're talking about like a few megabytes at most here per block. And so, computers have gigabytes worth of RAM. The current nodes operate in 24 gigabytes of RAM today because of the large UTXO set size. So it's like very, very marginal at the edges, and it's not going to impact the performance of the node at all. Now, if we kept raising it and we raised it kind of unbounded, it can start having impacts. And so, there's definitely a curve here that we have to be conscious of. But for this change, especially breaking it up into these increments, I wouldn't anticipate, just from my intuition, and it's not borne out in the benchmarking, that it's going to have any impact on block propagation times, or what really matters for SPOs is your chance to win a height battle.
The thing is, right, these assumptions based on the current network load, or is this something that was also tested like under conditions where there's a much larger network load, much more transactions, let's say, being run across the network, how that would affect the node performance. Was that also considered during the testing?
So I can jump in here on. I cannot talk about exactly what the IOG performance team tested. I assume yes, but what I can tell is that the data that we collected already like years ago, that was like a different, a slightly different situation than now, both on the load but also on the node development. So there was a lot of performance tuning on the node side meanwhile, but that should, let's say, mostly or by far most should have improved the situation from now. But what we did back then is we did not just look at the data from one day or from a very ideal perspective, but what we collected and really analyzed was months long of very different situations. So like congested times, low load times. Also, we looked into completely different kind of blocks. So like you can have a block with a lot of many small standard transactions, and then just one such larger or more complex block in, or you can have something like one block with just 4 very complex transactions in. And we had propagation times for all kind of these blocks. If I remember right, you did a cross comparison with looking into what kind of things were in these blocks. And then it was a chart where you could easily, I remember there was a chart so over block size and complexity and all kind of things we compared on X and Y axis. And there was some real clear evidence about some empty room where we had no such blocks because just the mem execution units were on its limit. And it really looked like there could be more done, but it is not allowed right now by the parameter.
Is that something, Pi, that you recall?
Yeah, I tweeted those out, and that was me, Marcus, and Smog all collaborated on those charts. I don't have them on hand, but if you Google my Twitter account and then memory limits, you'll probably find it. But yeah, I mean, I'm almost certain, to answer your original question, IOG has also done a bunch of benchmarking, kind of underload and things like that. Yeah. In particular, when they bumped the parameter in preview, we helped them do a load test. We just generated hundreds of thousands of Sunday swap transactions to really fill those blocks. And obviously it's no substitute for real world testing, which is why they're doing it in kind of intermediate stages. But there's a lot of strong evidence that really this will be a non-issue for block propagation times.
That should be reassuring really to the SPOs, right? Hearing this, if you ask me, right? Especially those who are concerned about, what if in the event of a height battle, let's say, and so a height battle on the conditions that of heavy network load, chances of one losing that height battle because of course, those are genuine, legitimate concerns that SPOs may have. But just listening to you guys, it sounds like it's all under control. It's way within the limits. So there's really no concern or no reason to be concerned about these things. That's how it. Am I understanding that correct, gentlemen?
That's my understanding anyway.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so just a quick question. We will have a new joiner soon with us, but let's see here. Guys, can you also give an example, Pi, from during your testing, in the testing phase, were there any moments that you thought this is not going well, or anything that showed up that you thought, hey, this needs to be looked at? Can you say anything about this?
I mean, I didn't do the extensive benchmarking that the Cardano Foundation or IOG did. So, and it's been really 2 years since I've looked at this in depth. But no, not really. I mean, again, just speaking from a intuitive standpoint, right? We're talking about like the biggest limit we're talking about here, which I think that we should be put like, if this goes well, we should consider pushing even more and higher limits, right? But even the biggest limit that we're talking about here today is like the size of an extra high definition image, right? That your computers or your phones load hundreds of times a day. Like the memory here compared to what a typical computer has, and especially with the improvements that are coming to the node that are going to drop the other memory requirements dramatically, like this should just not be anything that we're remotely concerned about. We should be able to allocate like a few hundred megabytes or a few even gigabytes for executing smart contracts, and it shouldn't be a problem. No, to answer your question, no, there's not anything that's given me pause, other than, you know, if something had come up in benchmarking, I could see kind of I could see the pushback on it, but nothing did. So
if I can add a small thing on this, the governance action that was submitted is a first one of 2 steps. So it is already carefully going half a step or a first step initially. And this is like a common thing or something that the designers or the protocol guardians, not guardians, that's the wrong term, like a technical steering committee or whoever decided the parameter settings in the past, they were very careful, and there was always something like, let's do a small step first, look how it goes, learn from it, and then see how we have a better understanding how we can do a second step and so on. As Dominic mentioned before, it would be much worse the other way around. And that could also happen if we would overpace now with a bigger step, not being fully sure, and then, oh, no, wait, we need to do another governance action and do half a step back. That would be worse. So that's why this governance action here already is a careful first step with potentially easy more room for more.
Why was it really necessary? That's kind of weird, because I'm pretty sure not all of the SPOs understand why a phased approach. I mean, why not do all of that at once?
I think we're mostly in agreement that they're very conservative in the numbers that they came up with, because you can't go backwards. And we're all saying like, this is generally fine. If we want to say what's the worst it can possibly be, I mean, if you go to the extreme, then it would be bad. But we are really far from that, from all our best understanding of how these systems work. I guess if you want to say what's the worst we could be looking at by doing these kind of changes is, are we making this a crutch for our scaling issues? We have scaling issues. It's immediately apparent that this, if you took it to the extreme, would be a problem. So like the worst interpretation is we're not coming up with better scaling solutions, so we're just going to make these resource limits higher. But you know, I feel like we've got to stretch to be like, it might be bad if we do this, because that is not what the proposal is. It's just, yes, if this is our only idea about how to scale, then yes, this would be bad.
Understood.
yeah, I agree with that.
Understood. We've just been joined by Phil. Phil, welcome.
Surprise guest.
Yeah,
Hello.
exactly.
Thank you guys for having me.
So, sure, go right ahead.
I was just going to say, yes, I agree to the previous statement, but also that this is sort of a natural factor of scaling. Like as the node gets faster, you need to increase the limits. And I think there have been enough incremental improvements up until now that the current limits are very far out of date. And if you look at like historic data of like the reference script to serialization attack, right? This was like essentially nodes doing over 100 times the amount of work that was costed for, and like, you know, over an hour of sustained this activity, and still the network maintained liveness. So this should show you how much room we have to increase parameter limits. I mean, there's like a massive space here. And like,
Now,
this scalability front, a lot of it has been pursued at the architecture level, but like the node itself, like there's room for like, 30x, 50x improvements in the efficiency of the node code.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and now obviously the user experience while it was under load wasn't the greatest, right? So we've got to fix that. But from a liveness standpoint, definitely. Yeah.
Just
Phil.
to
Go right
Sorry.
ahead there, Joe.
Oh, to play the devil's advocate, we do have RAM becoming quite expensive these days, so that may be a factor here.
Yeah, but we're
Marcus.
not talking about 24 gigabytes of RAM, right? Everybody's already running on 24 gigabytes. We're going to free that up with the UTXO HD. Nodes, we're seeing on Amaru, we're running nodes in, the range of 200 megabytes to 2 gigabytes. So, yeah, obviously we don't want to push the memory limits up to, all of a sudden you need a supercomputer with 100 gigabytes of RAM to run a node. But I think we're well within those limits as it is right now.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these optimizations don't even have to do with increasing hardware requirements. It's just like better software for the node, an optimization sprint to improve the efficiency of the node code. I have a SIP for caching reference scripts, right? With this SIP, there's benchmark data that if you performed the reference script deserialization attack on mainnet, right, the exact same transactions, it would have had zero impact on the chain. Right, it just would have executed seamlessly. And this is like a factor of 100x improvement from a simple change of code. And there's so many instances of optimization like this that like a lot of people, they lose the forest for the trees when they're looking at, let's increase the throughput of the network. We have to go to Laos or completely change our architecture. There's so much room in the current architecture for huge improvements.
Guys, just a quick question to our SPOs who is joining us. One of the things that we've seen, over the past year, especially with SPO participation, is that, the participation in voting is lower, slightly lower than we expected. Just for you, and if you're joining us, please answer that in the chat to us. What is really withholding you from participating, in voting? What is that? Help us to really understand this so that we, at least the experts here, can take this to the technical steering committee or their peers, and try and see if we can fix that. So please place that in the chat. Let us know. Share with us. I think it's valuable for everyone.
As an SPO myself, I can say that part of the reason, I haven't voted on this yet. Part of the reason is it's for SPOs with cold keys, ideally in an air-gapped machine. The tooling there to sign it is actually still pretty bad, right? It takes me like probably 30, 45 minutes to download the transaction bytes, get them into the right format, send them over to my cold air-gapped machine, sign it, get it back. Like it's a whole process. So at least for me, I usually delay my vote until the last minute, and then because I'm so busy. And then, with some votes, I've actually missed the vote. Apologies for anybody who's delegating to me for that. But yeah, so I think that's one way that we can definitely improve is provide better tooling. We've come a long way in integrating voting directly into wallets or with gov tools and things like that. That's really helpful for your standard DREP who is using a hot wallet to vote. But for an SPO, we place a lot more security on our SPO key. So for me personally, that's one barrier. Just answering from that angle.
On this, I can quickly jump in. It's not jump in with a solution, but it is a very well-known problem. It is, for example, a large number of early SPOs, or almost all SPOs, created their pools with keys when there was no hardware wallet. So the air-gapped machine and the very careful handling of the cold keys is crucial. and hopefully all of the SPOs also do it. It looks really like it is a relevant thing, and they do it, which is good. The good news is that there is a CIP in the work, and Ryan is working on it, because there is something called Calidus keys. So Calidus, I was in the chat when the guys looked for a name, is a Latin term for like every day. And this means it is a derivation of your cold key that you can use as an SPO for day-to-day signing of in the name of your pool. And the CIP that is coming is looking into making this a viable and a practical thing that can be used by SPOs to vote on chain for CIP 6094 governance actions. It's a thing from the future and also needs some time and work, but as for now, the SPOs please need to vote with their cold keys because everything, just a reminder, what we talk here is not a thing that comes. It only comes if the SPOs vote for it. If not, then this is not going to happen.
Exactly. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because Martin Lang, also a stake pool operator with us, joining here live, he says here, my guess is that many SPOs don't want to pull out, their cold keys. Same as what you guys are saying as well. SPO scripts helps with the offline voting, but still, we need Calidus SPO key integration. Thank you, Martin, really for putting this forward. I know you've been heavily involved in the creation of the Calidus SPO key, and thank you for that. Appreciate all the great things that you've been doing for the SPO community. Speaking about voting and the use of keys, guys, we do want to make sure that SPOs feel as secure, as safe, as confident as they can, to participate in voting. We want to see those numbers go up in terms of participation. About the integration and allowing SPOs to use the Calidus keys, how far off are we with this, do you guys think? Again, I want to just give the SPOs an outlook, the SPOs tuning in. Marcus, you're muted.
Yeah. Now I'm unmuted. Sorry. Yeah. It's very difficult to predict. So I assume that this requires some sort of a hard fork and some preparation or some bundling with a hard fork. It is not just coming with a node update. And so, we will probably not see like 2 or 3 or 4 hard forks a year, but mostly what we last discussed, if I remember right, in the technical steering committee is, if possible, then always bundle significant changes, hard forks, also functionality for about significant changes into 2 hard forks per year. And in order to have the proper staging, so like first test it on test nets, before that have a code freeze, and also not run into typical vacation times like year-end, Christmas vacation, or summer vacation times. The timing we found is something like having a hard fork in April or March or April maybe makes sense, and another one in late summer or early autumn or in autumn. If we can hold this, then this would mean such a Calidus integration potentially could come in autumn this year. So like in not more than half a year from now. But yeah, then I think that would be already a very quick or the soonest possible thing. And then if not then consider it like a thing in a year from now.
Yes. Okay. So despite the fact, that, let's say, the SPO participation was, let's say, slightly lower than what is expected, we have to acknowledge the fact that in the past day or two, we've definitely seen a huge increase in SPO participation, particularly for this parameter change governance action. So it seems like there are participation. There is participation from amongst the SPOs. It's just that there are SPOs among us who just, are not comfortable, as you also mentioned, Pi, taking, your cold keys, your keys out of your cold storage and using them, to participate in the voting process. So we need an alternative solution that would allow SPOs to feel confident, that they don't necessarily need to touch their code keys. And that's where really the Calidus key solution comes in that Martin has been working on. Right. Guys, I think it's pretty clear. Just to wrap it up, Pi, I know you also have to leave in a bit. Just to wrap this up, is there anything that you guys would like to share with the SPO community that would potentially take away any concerns that they may have in terms of voting, and concerns that they may have in terms of this particular parameter change governance action, maybe affecting their node performance or block propagation time?
I would just kind of, as a closing note, beyond my closing thought being we need to push this much further. This is a great first step, but we need to see repeated increases. One other interesting angle to it that I haven't heard discussed here is it is much safer to raise block limits than transaction limits, because block limits can be reduced again if it turns out to have an impact. So what I would, and the reason for that is exactly what Dominic was saying earlier. If you increase the transaction limits, somebody may build a protocol that relies on that limit. And then if you reduce them again, you brick their protocol. If you raise the block limits, that just means more transactions can fit within a block. You lower it again, okay, fewer transactions can fit within a block again. It's not as disruptive of a change to do that. Obviously, it brings your throughput back down. So the cadence I'd like to see in order for us to get confidence to raise this, like many of us are advocating for again in the future, is let's look at raising the block limit first, seeing how that impacts the network, and then if everything's well, we raise the transaction limit, right? And that gives us kind of this like almost two-phase commit approach to getting confidence in this. We can raise the block limit, measure the networks, get confidence that nothing bad is happening. If we do see it kind of start to wobble at the edges, we bring it back down and we consider other alternatives. But if we don't, then we raise the transaction limits to kind of follow. And I think that cadence would give us a lot more confidence, rather than right now we're breaking it up into multiple increases, but we're doing both at once, which means that it means we have to do a lot of benchmarking ahead of that change. So that would be kind of my recommendation for the future that I think would make this go a lot smoother.
Well, back to the steering committee then. Micah.
Yes.
Any closing thoughts from you to help reassure the SPO community?
Yeah, it seems like a fairly mild change. So yeah, I agree with everyone here.
Thank you. Dominic.
Yeah, I'm going to probably do something similar, and I think what Pi just suggested was very sensible. It's quite hard to come up with the counter argument for doing this change. I guess hopefully, like, it's so uncontroversial. This is just an exercise in doing governance. So it's an easy first step in that one.
Yeah, thanks. Marcus.
Not that much to add. I just looked up. We had a couple of attempts for parameter change proposals so far, not that many, so less than a handful. And one of them was so far approved. So that was a cost model adoption. But that was basically a preparation for the Chang hard fork. So like the whole hard fork would not have been possible without that preparation. So this here, I consider it will be one of the first significant parameter changes as a governance action. So as an SPO or even DREPs still need to vote in order to bring it to enactment. It will be a first thing, a novel thing. Please vote.
Agree. And I think ultimately we have to also keep in mind that this proposal, it benefits, as far as I made to understand it, correct me, it benefits not only the dApp developers, but also the users eventually. The ADA users, the ADA holders, the people who are using the network. So it is in the benefit.
And ultimately SPOs, because more use of the network and bigger transactions means paying more fees, means, it's going to take us a long way to replace the reserve emissions, but that's the road we're on, is how do we increase the fees that we can bring in so that SPOs can be sustainable for the long term.
Exactly. I love that thought, by the way. I know you have to leave, and I have just one last question, because you mentioned about increasing the block transaction and increasing also the block transaction and the
block limits and the transaction limits.
Exactly, the block limits and the transaction limits. That is also possible to do them separately.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the case, and if maybe that's even a better approach, right? Why have we chosen to do this way, like now with both of them?
From my perspective, the numbers that we're raising here in this proposal are so conservative that there's absolutely zero doubt that the network will be completely fine and unimpacted at all by this. It's such a trivial increase that, like, we're talking about, we have room for 100x this, then we can start debating about security implications of this.
Yeah, what I was talking about is basically taking larger steps in the block limits, not taking our current proposal and just splitting it into two. That just slows us down. But if we wanted to kind of really aggressively push this, we could say, okay, let's double the block limit, see how that impacts the network, and then have the transaction limit follow if everything is fine, rather than an 11%, 17% increase here and there. So yeah, definitely. This limit, changing both at once, it's really just to kind of get our feet wet with governance. It's really our training wheels. Hey, can we even get anything passed? And then from there, how do we proceed? How do we make more? Because if we proceed at this pace, it's going to be 2030, 2035 before we get, meaningful, real big improvements. And, to Dominic's point earlier, this also can't be our only dimension to scaling, right? It is very helpful. We should push it because it increases the complexity of things that you can do on chain, increases the security in an indirect way, but we also have to pair it with other scalability improvements. And so that's how my proposal was more about how we can accelerate that process rather than that would have been a better way to do it than doing it both at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot. Phil, final.
Yeah, I hope that this proposal is completely uncontroversial, and again, it is perceived as just testing the waters with parameter changes. And I hope that, as Pi said earlier, many more follow this shortly after. It is very important that we start messing around with the upper bounds of what's possible on Cardano. Otherwise, it's going to be 2030 before we've made any changes to protocol parameters, significant, impactful changes. And the only way to really know what works is to test it in the market to some degree, right?
Yeah.
And I hope that also this whole thing reinvigorates discussion around optimizing the existing node and taking advantage of the potential 10x, 50x throughput benefits that we can get from that with very, very small incremental optimizations.
Amazing. Maybe that's even, let's say, a round table with a by itself, really with a clear kind of like, flow charts and showing really how that would look like.
Denisio, can I quickly jump in? I think that is worth to also add it because I agree with what was said. This proposal here has a very long history, and it is high on time that it finally will be enacted now or brought above the finish line. One thing that we need to be very careful, or I want to say here so that it is not misunderstood, because it right now sounded like we should do much more things in a faster pace. Yes, and then as we also discussed this challenge for the stake pool operators to touch their cold keys, that would mean, let's group a bunch of changes into one voting phase. So like submit all the governance actions all together so the SPOs can get in their hands the cold keys and then vote like 10 proposals or 20 proposals at once. Similar like now someone would assume we did with the treasury withdrawal actions. So like 50 proposals in parallel, and then there is one big voting month and huge discussions and topics and what else, but then we have voted it and we are through. If we will do this with technical parameter changes, and one or two of them may cause somehow noticeable negative or unpredicted effect on the network, then it would be very difficult to measure it and prove or find out what exactly caused it. So that's a little bit a different thing than treasury withdrawal. So I fully agree, we need to speed up, we need to make these things progressing faster, but it's not going like what we did or what we saw in the treasury withdrawal last year.
All right. Thank you there, Marcus. Appreciate it. Guys, I appreciate each and every one of you for coming out today. Unfortunately, Pi had to leave a bit earlier, but thank you, Pi, for your contribution today in today's discussion. It was absolutely valued and appreciated. Thank you, Dominic. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Micah, Marcus, really for tuning in today with us. And thank you, everyone online, for tuning in. Again, we need these discussions. SPO participation in governance voting is critical, especially when it comes to really like parameter changes like this, because eventually moving Cardano forward depends also on your participation. So thank you all for voting. And if you have any questions about, let's say, contributing, how to vote, reach out to one of the experts here on the panel. I'm pretty sure they're able to help you or guide you in the right direction. Thank you all. Until next time.